Welcome, everyone. Today we're looking into a really disturbing story from India. It's about a community just living under this constant shadow of fear.
Yeah, it's centered on one man, Akku Yadav, whose brutality went unchecked for years, not just by neighbors, but frighteningly by the system that was supposed to protect them.
It's a deeply unsettling case.
We've been going through various articles, reports. They really chronicle his life, his rise as this terrifying figure in a slum called Kasturba Nagar, and the extraordinary violent end to his reign.
And our aim here isn't just to recount the events, the mob justice aspect. We want to try and understand the whole picture.
Right. Looking at these sources to really grasp the desperation, the systemic failures, and just the sheer endurance of the people involved. Why did something so extreme happen? That's the core question.
So let's start at the beginning. Akku Yadav, his real name was Paris Garacharn Yadav. The sources point to a real contrast in his background.
Yeah, that's right. His family, they weren't like super rich, but they had resources. A farm, livestock. They were definitely better off than most people in the slum where they lived. Kasturba Nagar near Nagpur.
And Akku himself apparently was a decent student, even described as handsome, well-behaved when he was young.
Which makes the contrast sharper, because Kasturba Nagar itself was predominantly Dalit.
Right, and maybe we should quickly explain Dalit for listeners who aren't familiar.
Sure. It means oppressed or downtrodden. It replaced the old offensive term untouchables. Basically, the lowest rung in India's historical caste system. They faced severe social exclusion, lacked basic rights opportunities, compared to higher caste.
So you've got this kid, relatively better off, living among people facing really extreme systemic disadvantages right from the start.
Exactly. And the reports we looked at suggest a turning point for Akku around age 13.
He fell in with the wrong crowd, as they say.
Pretty much. Started smoking, drinking, gambling, petty theft, even though his family wasn't poor.
And then his father died suddenly. That seemed to make things worse.
Yeah, it looks like it accelerated his path. The family faced money problems, selling assets like cows and land just to pay for his sister's dowries.
That instability.
It seems to have pushed him deeper into delinquency. He ended up forming his own gang.
And his crimes weren't small for long. The articles mentioned things like robbing a couple at knife point.
Yeah, stealing a watch, beating them up. He'd walk into shops, just take things, assault vendors if they complained, destroy their stalls. If he wanted a motorbike, he'd just take it. Forcefully.
This wasn't just about theft, was it? It sounds like it was about power control.
Absolutely. Establishing fear. The sources paint this picture of people being terrified to leave their homes. There's one account, really chilling, about a funeral procession having to wait for hours. Just hours.
Why?
Because Akku and his gang were playing cards nearby, and nobody dared disturb them or ask them to move.
That says a lot about the level of fear.
It really does. And it escalated. Home invasions at night, sometimes for money, valuables, other times just forcing terrified families to cook food for him and his gang.
Just terrorizing them.
But then came this really horrific shift. Around 1991, this is when, according to the reports, the sexual assaults began.
A devastating turning point. Just tell us about that first recorded instance.
He came across a couple having a picnic. The initial idea was robbery, but it changed. He separated the man, beat him up badly, and then he raped the woman.
And that led to his first arrest.
Yes, his first time in jail.
Did that have any effect? Did it maybe deter him?
Well, the reports suggest the absolute opposite. Tragically, jail wasn't reformative. It sounds like he just connected with more hardened criminals, learned more, became even more menacing when he got out.
So he gets released, and the assaults, they didn't stop.
No, that's when they became systematic, just widespread. The sources describe this horrifying pattern. He saw women purely as objects for sex, no regard for their humanity at all.
And he targeted anyone.
Anyone. Age didn't matter. Young girls, older women, marital status didn't matter, single, married, mothers, even pregnant women. Nobody was safe from him.
And how were these assaults happening? Where?
In their own homes. Sometimes he'd snatch women right off the street, even during the day. Some accounts mention women being held captive in, safe houses for repeated assaults.
Living with that constant threat?
Yeah.
It must have been paralyzing. How could victims even think about reporting it?
Exactly. The fear was overwhelming. And the sources point to a couple of big reasons. First, the intense societal stigma in India at that time.
Right. Victims of sexual assault often faced shame, blame, Ostracization from their own families and community.
Precisely. They feared being seen as impure, bringing shame. And then there was the very direct, very real fear of Akku himself. If they spoke out, he would retaliate violently. His threats weren't empty.
And if someone did find the courage to go to the police, what happened then?
This is where the systemic failure just becomes glaringly obvious. The report showed this consistent pattern: police disbelief, suspicion.
They didn't believe the victims.
Often, no. They'd accuse them of being prostitutes or say they must have consented for money. Just general indifference, dismissal of their complaints. It's sickening to read.
And does this tie back to the caste difference you mentioned? Akku being from a relatively better off, higher caste family compared to the mostly Dalit victims.
The report strongly suggests it does. It looks like blatant bias. The police inaction seems directly linked to the victim's low social status and Akku's relative privilege and connections.
The sources mention possible corruption too, right? Bribery.
Yes, that suggested that the police might have been taking bribes from Akku, which, if true, would certainly explain why they consistently failed to protect anyone.
The impact on the women, the victims, it must have been just devastating.
Heartbreaking doesn't begin to cover it. The report shares some specific, tragic examples. There was one woman, just 10 days after giving birth. She set herself on fire, committed suicide, couldn't cope after being raped in her home.
Oh my God.
Another woman, 7 months pregnant. He beat her unconscious and raped her. She was too terrified to report it because he threatened to come back, cause her to miscarry.
So the community was trapped, terrorized by Akku, abandoned by the police. Just complete hopelessness.
It really paints that picture, abandoned by the entire legal system. But even in that darkness, the reports highlight some incredible acts of resistance.
Like Asha Bhagat. She's described as a guardian angel.
Yes. She ran a liquor shop in the slum, which gave her a certain standing. She knew people, apparently even some other local criminals, who sometimes sort of offered protection against Akku's gang.
And she actually stood up to him.
Openly defied him, confronted him and his gang, told them to leave the poor people alone. She had this incredibly brave attitude. The reports quote Carter basically saying, look, if I meant to die fighting him, fine, but shouldn't we all unite and kill him?
That's incredible courage. Did her defiance lead to action?
It did. Asha actually led an organized attempt by the community to kill Akku. He survived, but reports say he was very badly injured.
And after that attack, someone close to Akku actually saved his life. His friend, Avinash Tiwari.
That's right. Avinash is described as a really kind person, liked by everyone, even Asha. He genuinely cared for Akku, apparently, and donated blood after the attack, which saved Akku's life.
That's complex. How did Akku react to his friend saving him, but also being friendly with Asha, the woman who orchestrated the attack?
Well, this just shows Akku's possessiveness, his cruelty. The reports say Akku was furious that Avinash associated with Asha at all.
And that anger, it led to something terrible.
It did. Tragically, according to the sources, in 1997, Akku murdered Avinash in broad daylight, simply because Avinash refused to cut ties with Asha.
He murdered his friend, the man who saved his life, because he wouldn't stop being friends with someone Akku hated.
That's what the reports detail. And here's another shocking part, showing the system's failure again. His sentence for that murder was just 10 months.
10 months for murder.
Unbelievable, right? The sources say Akku saw jail as a joke. A vacation, a hotel. He apparently still had access to alcohol, gambling. It just reinforces that the system wasn't working on any level. Not protecting victims, not even really punishing perpetrators.
So he gets out after just 10 months for murder, and his focus is immediately back on Asha.
Exactly. Revenge. That was his goal upon release, according to the reports. And he achieved it.
What happened to Asha?
It was horrific. In 1999, Akku's gang lured her outside her home late one night, pretending they needed water. As soon as she opened the door, they dragged her out.
And killed her.
Brutally. Right in front of her 14-year-old daughter. The details in the reports are graphic. Decapitation, mutilation of her ears, nose, breasts. They stole her jewelry right off her body. It was meant to send a message. Absolute terror.
And her daughter witnessed this.
Yes. The trauma was immense. She had to be relocated for safety, and she ultimately wouldn't testify against Akku because he continued to threaten her even from afar through his network. Another example of him silencing justice.
And the sentence Akku got for Asha's murder, let me guess.
Minimal.
16 months.
Yeah.
Just 16 months. The reports even mention police officers being casual, friendly with him when they arrested him, buying him snacks. You can see why the community felt the police were corrupt, biased.
It's just staggering. So he does another short stint and comes back out.
Yes. And his reign of terror just got worse. By this point, his record was huge. 14 arrests, 26 criminal cases, murder, theft, extortion, robbery, assault, abduction, threats, you name it.
But through all that and all the rapes you mentioned earlier, over 40 victims in the slum, was he ever actually charged with sexual assault?
Never. The sources are very clear on that. Not once. The official police line was that no one would testify.
But the real reasons were fear and the police dismissing them.
Exactly. Fear of Akku's retaliation, combined with that pattern of police indifference, disbelief, and a potential corruption. The system simply refused to acknowledge those crimes, let alone protect the victims.
This went on for years. Violence, impunity, what finally broke the cycle. It comes down to 2004, and a woman named Usha Narayane.
Tell us about her.
She was 25, educated, worked in hotel management. She dressed differently, Western clothes like a suit, knee-length skirt. She stood out in the slum.
And Akku noticed her, targeted her.
Yes. He harassed her specifically, calling her awful names like Western prostitute. Usha, understandably, tried to ignore him, just avoid trouble.
But she couldn't avoid it forever.
No. In late July 2004, something happened. Usha saw Akku and his gang across the street from a particular house. Later that same night, a young girl ran out of that house, terrified, seeking help from Usha.
What had happened?
Akku had just raped her.
So Usha, knowing everything she knew about the police, about Akku, she decided to take the girl to the station.
She did, an incredibly brave thing to do given the history, and the police reaction was, well, exactly what you'd expect based on the reports.
Dismissal, demanding evidence.
Yep, sent them away empty-handed, but then something even worse happened, a betrayal.
What was that?
The reports claim that after Usha left, a police officer actually contacted Akku, told him Usha had reported him, and basically told Akku he needed to deal with her.
The police essentially sixed him on her.
It appears that way. Gave him the green light, and Akku reacted immediately. August 1st, 2004. He gathered about 40 of his men, surrounded Usha's house, shouting threats, rape, death.
What could she possibly do, trapped like that?
Her response was desperate, but incredibly defiant. She dragged a gas cylinder to her front door, opened the valve, and threatened to light it.
She was going to blow herself up and take them with her.
That was the threat. She was prepared to die rather than let them get her.
Wow. Just wow.
And her neighbors heard it all. They heard her defiance, her willingness to make that ultimate sacrifice. They were still too scared to come out individually, but hearing her, something snapped.
That was the turning point for the whole community.
It seemed so. According to the reports, this was the catalyst. These neighbors, who'd lived in fear for so long, seen the system fail again and again, heard this woman ready to die. They'd finally had enough.
So they came out.
Yes, over 300 villagers. Grabbing anything they could, knives from their kitchens, sticks, stones, they opened their doors and confronted Akku's gang, together.
And faced with a unified, angry mob.
Akku and his men panicked. They fled in terror. It was the first time the community had really fought back collectively and won. Their first taste of power against him.
So Akku was on the run, but the community didn't let up.
No way. The reports describe this real sense of unity, this determination. People who had left the slum actually came back. They pooled money for information on his whereabouts. They surrounded places they thought he might be hiding. They were relentless.
And Akku, facing this, made a decision based on his past experiences.
He did. On August 7th, 2004, he turned himself into the police. He figured jail was safer than facing the villagers. He thought it was his hotel, his safe haven, where the police he knew would protect him.
Which led to that final, shocking confrontation at the courthouse.
Exactly. August 13th, 2004. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, Akku's brought to the Nagpur courthouse for a hearing. And outside, there's this huge crowd waiting, mostly women from the slum, chanting curses at him.
And even then, facing them, he was arrogant.
Unbelievably so. The reports say he was smiling, no remorse. He actually spotted one of his victims in the crowd and taunted her. Said something like, "Oh, you're here? Just wait till I get out, you'll be next."
And the police, what did they do when he said that?
This is just infuriating. The reports state the police officers escorting him laughed.
They laughed. That must have been the final straw.
It was the spark that lit the fuse. His threat, the police laughter. One of the women reportedly threw her slipper at him, and then the crowd just erupted.
Hundreds of people surging forward.
Yes, mostly women. The police scrambled, rushed Akku inside the courthouse, locked the doors.
But it didn't hold them back.
Not a chance. They started throwing stones, smashing the courthouse windows, breaking down the doors. Hundreds poured inside. And they had only one target, Akku. Handcuffed, guarded by police, but completely exposed.
And the attack itself, the reports are brutal.
Incredibly violent. Women threw chili powder in his eyes, blinding him, making him fall. Then the mob just descended on him. Sticks, stones, hitting his head repeatedly. And then the knives came out, kitchen knives.
The reports specifically mention the women stabbing him.
Yes, they emphasize it. There are accounts of knives bending on his bones and other women using stones to straighten the blades so they could continue stabbing. It was just this explosion of years, decades of pent-up rage, terror, and frustration.
Did he say anything at the end? There are different accounts.
Yeah, some reports say he pleaded for forgiveness. Others say he kept issuing threats. It's unclear. But the assault was overwhelming. He died there on the courtroom floor. Over 70 stab wounds.
And the reports mention mutilation afterwards.
Yes. Cutting off body parts, slicing skin, beating his flesh. The police, apparently completely overwhelmed and probably terrified themselves, they just fled during the attack.
And after it was over, how did the community react?
Reports say it was like a celebration, people chanting, returning to the slum, declaring they were finally free from fear.
But the police did come back later, made arrests.
Yes, later that evening. They arrested 5 women who were identified as having participated in the killing.
Did the community's unity hold then?
It absolutely did. Hundreds of other women came forward saying, "Arrest me too, I did it." Older women, mothers, offered to take the place of younger women, especially pregnant ones, in jail. Incredible solidarity.
And this led to protests against the police.
Massive protests. Over 400 people marching for days, highlighting the hypocrisy, really. Years of police failing to protect them, but swift arrests when they finally took matters into their own hands.
What happened legally to the women who were arrested?
The initial 5 got bail. Eventually, in 2014, a trial was held for 18 defendants who had confessed, but they were all acquitted.
Acquitted.
Yeah.
After confessing.
Yes. And the judge's reasoning, according to the reports, was quite remarkable. The court explicitly acknowledged the police's catastrophic failure to protect the victims despite years of pleas. The judge basically stated that this mob violence was a direct consequence of the legal system's failure, the corruption, the bias against the poor and lower castes.
So the court essentially blamed the system for creating the conditions for the lynching.
That's how it reads in the reports. It's a complex outcome, obviously. Some people feel it was justice, maybe the only justice possible for Akku's victims. Others argue mob violence is never the answer, no matter what.
What did the villagers themselves say, according to the sources? Did they want to kill him?
Their perspective, as reported, was clear. They didn't want to do it, they felt utterly abandoned, and that this was the only option left. They would have preferred proper justice through the courts, him being jailed, maybe even reformed, but that path was completely blocked for them. For decades.
Did the women involved face any backlash later?
Some did, yes. Reports mention people losing jobs, facing some social ostracism. But the prevailing feeling, according to the accounts, was that ending Akku's reign of terror, protecting their families, it was worth the personal cost.
So the Akku Yadav case, when you piece it together from these sources, it's just this stark, profoundly disturbing example of what happens when the systems meant to protect people fail so completely, so systematically.
Yeah, it goes way beyond just a crime story. It's about the limits of what people can endure, what justice even means when the law offers none, and the desperate, tragic actions people might resort to when every other door is slammed shut.
It leaves you with a heavy question, really. When the system fails so utterly, when fear is the only constant for years, what options are actually left for people who are oppressed? Something to really think about.
Definitely. A deeply complex and troubling story.
Thank you for exploring this with us today. And to our listeners, if you found this story compelling, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel, Horror Docs. We'll see you next time.